guess like Sunday night, December 1st, Sunday night. I forgot to add this in the last forecast I did, but we have a trine between Mercury in Sagittarius and Chiron in Aries. So Mercury is the planet that represents the mind, represents the intellect. It also governs over communication and short distance travel. And Mercury being in the sign of Sagittarius means essentially that our mental faculties are expanded, right? And maybe we're wanting to go deeper with the things that we take an interest in, right? So instead of indulging our curiosity, maybe there's like a project, or maybe there's like a particular topic of study that you want to study more fully. And then Chiron is the wounded healer. I like to call it the trauma asteroid. And it's in the sign of Aries, the sign of the individual, right? So we have a trine forming between these two planets, Mercury and Chiron, right? So perhaps there is some insight that you can gain with regards to your own trauma surrounding maybe your self-confidence, your self-expression, right? That sort of stuff. And then that's basically happening late Sunday night. Monday, December 2nd, we have Venus in Capricorn forming a trine to Uranus in Taurus. Okay, so Venus is the planet that governs over relationships. It governs over friendships, relationships with family and friends. I think I just said that. Anyways, but Venus in Capricorn is a Venus that wants to take things a bit more seriously, maybe wants to get serious about things, right? Like a Venus in Capricorn is someone that is very committed. It's the person that wants a long-term relationship as opposed to like a short fling, right? And it's forming a trine to Uranus in Taurus, right? And Uranus again is one of those generational influences, so it stays in a sign for a really long time. But Uranus is the planet that has to do with chaos, upheavals, revolutions. It has to do with the collective, but it also has to do with like individuality, right? So it's really about kind of like embracing your sense of uniqueness, right? So Venus and Uranus together, that usually is going to result in people maybe wanting to explore things a bit more, wanting to like venture out, right? Venus and Uranus, typically when they're seen in an aspect together, a lot of astrologers will say that it's like sort of like an affair type of aspect, right? But this particular aspect is happening when both Venus and Uranus are in Earth signs. So there's more like stability and there's more groundedness than there usually is with this type of configuration, right? So exploring things in your pre-existing relationships more deeply, right? Like going deeper into things. Yeah. I'm gonna just play around with this. Ooh, that's kind of loud. Hear that super well, but on Wednesday, December 4th, we have Mercury in Sagittarius again, forming an opposition to Jupiter in Gemini. Right, so I've already talked about Mercury in Sagittarius, but Jupiter in Gemini. Jupiter is the planet of expansion, it's the planet of luck, it's the planet of like abundance. And the interesting thing about this alignment is that Jupiter will be in its detriment in the sign of Gemini, right? So Jupiter naturally rules over Sagittarius, and Sagittarius is naturally opposing the sign of Gemini, right? So basically, Jupiter is in the sign opposite the sign that it rules over, right? So basically, a Jupiter in Gemini, it's basically an energy that wants to do everything, right? That wants to dip its toes into everything, right? And that's kind of why it's in its detriment, because Jupiter likes to go deep into a particular topic, a particular area of study, right? Jupiter in Sagittarius, for example, would be someone who is a scholar in one particular area, you know? And a Jupiter in Gemini is more about like being a hobby hoarder, if you know what I mean, like having multiple hobbies and like doing multiple this square on Wednesday. It's going to form this square to Saturn in Pisces, right? And Saturn is the planet of restriction, right? So we're wanting to be optimistic and we're wanting to be really hopeful and joyful about a certain thing. But at the same time, we need to be grounded in what we're doing, right? We need to be grounded in our sense of responsibility and duty, especially when it comes to our responsibilities to humanity, to each other, right? And to our broader communities, because that's kind of what Pisces is all about, right? Remember, Saturn's in Pisces. So, yeah, and not only that, but the same day, there's so much happening on this one day. The same day, we have Venus and Capricorn forming a sextile to Neptune and Pisces, okay? Venus, again, in Capricorn, very devoted, very loving, very serious. It's, the person that wants to be in a serious, committed relationship, right? And Neptune in Pisces is all about transcendence. It's about spiritual reality. It's about being connected to higher power, right? It's said that Venus is essentially like the lower octave of Neptune, and Neptune is the higher octave of Venus, because they represent very similar things, right? So it's going to be nice, it's going to be very harmonious overall. But yeah, with some of the other stuff going on that day, there's also going to be some difficulties. There's also going to be some frustrations emerging, but it is going to overall be a fairly harmonious time for relationships, for fostering relationships with others. So that's my advice for Wednesday, is to really lean into your close interpersonal relationships to kind of potentially cope with some of those frustrations. social event or something, like a get together with your friends. Thursday would be like a really good day to do it. Thursday going into like Friday. Yeah. relationships more seriously, having serious conversations about their relationships, regardless of whether that's like romantic or platonic. But then with Venus in Aquarius, it's going to be more about like having fun and just feeling released from like the constraints of your relationships, right? So maybe something to watch out for if you know people Gemini energy, right? Sagittarius is, again, the sign of the devoted scholar, and Gemini's more so the sign of the hobbyist. So we're seeing this push and pull between really wanting to invest in something versus wanting to just be curious about things and be very surface level, right? So there's this balance that you'll need to find between indulging in your curiosity and like really committing yourself to something, right? So it's kind of the same theme that we've seen quite a bit with like the Mercury in Sagittarius, and with the Mercury in Sagittarius forming an opposition to Jupiter and Gemini. It's very similar. It's not the same, obviously, but it's very similar, right? I will say too, anytime the Sun and Jupiter